20,000 British bullets, 1,700 red-coated soldiers armed with the most advanced rifles on earth. A defensive position that military doctrine deemed unbreakable, and charging toward them 300 Zulu warriors armed with nothing but cowhide shields and short stabbing spears. By sunset, 1,329 British soldiers would lie dead on African soil, the worst defeat a modern European army had ever suffered at the hands of indigenous warriors. But here's what I'm going to reveal. First, the fatal technological assumption that blinded the British to their doom. Second, the psychological weapon the Zulu employed that turned rifles into liabilities. Third, the 30-second sequence that shattered an empire's invincibility. How could men with spears defeat Martini Henry rifles that fired 11 rounds per minute? Why did British soldiers, veterans of colonial wars across 3 continents, break and run? What made this particular Zulu regiment unstoppable when others had been mowed down by gunfire? How could 300 warriors punch through a line that mathematics said was impenetrable? Why does this battle still make military historians uncomfortable 145 years later? This is the story of the uMbonambi regiment and how 300 men achieved what every military manual said was impossible. To understand how they shattered the British line at Isandlwana, we need to step back to January 11th, 1879, when Lieutenant General Lord Chelmsford made the decision that would doom his army. To understand how 300 Zulu warriors accomplished the impossible, let me take you to southern Africa in 1879, where 2 empires were hurtling toward collision. The British Empire, at the height of Victorian power, had spent a decade consolidating its grip on southern Africa. High Commissioner Sir Henry Bartle Frere saw one obstacle to total domination: the Zulu Kingdom. Here was an independent African nation with a standing army of 40,000 warriors, territorial ambitions, and a king, Cetshwayo Kampande, who refused to kneel. Frere manufactured a crisis, delivering an ultimatum he knew was impossible to accept: disband the entire Zulu military within 30 days. When Cetshwayo predictably refused, Frere had his war. What politicians in London saw as a minor colonial police action would become Britain's worst military disaster since the Crimea. Lieutenant General Lord Chelmsford commanded the invasion force. At 52 years old, he embodied Victorian military confidence. Some would say arrogance. He'd fought in the Crimean War, crushed resistance in India, and pacified Xhosa warriors in South Africa. His strategic thinking was shaped by one core belief: modern rifles made European armies invincible against indigenous forces. He'd watched Martini Henry rifles mow down African warriors at a rate that made traditional warfare obsolete. Give me enough ammunition, he believed, and I could hold any position against any number of spear-wielding attackers. This conviction would kill him, or rather, kill 1,300 of his men while he was 20 miles away, making the same miscalculation twice. They called him methodical, but his subordinates whispered a different word: contemptuous. Contemptuous of Zulu military capability. Contemptuous of warnings from Boer settlers who'd fought the Zulu and learned respect the hard way. At a staff meeting weeks before the invasion, when an officer suggested the Zulu might employ sophisticated tactics, Chelmsford reportedly laughed. "They'll come at us in a rush, we'll shoot them down, and that will be that." Facing Chelmsford across the Buffalo River was King Cetshwayo Kampande, 53 years old, who'd spent his entire reign preparing for this war he didn't want. Cetshwayo had modernized his kingdom, maintained the military system his uncle Shaka had perfected, and tried desperately to avoid conflict with the British. He'd watched European armies crush African kingdoms from Egypt to Ethiopia. He knew rifles outranged spears. But he also knew something Chelmsford didn't. Technological superiority means nothing if you can't bring it to bear. His army had trained for one specific tactical scenario, closing the distance before rifles could achieve killing efficiency. They called it Horns of the Buffalo, and it had crushed every enemy the Zulu had faced for 50 years. The power dynamic was mathematically absurd. Britain possessed industrial manufacturing, railway logistics, modern artillery, breech, loading rifles, and an empire spanning a quarter of the globe. The Zulu had athletic conditioning, tactical discipline, intimate terrain knowledge, and 40,000 warriors willing to charge into rifle fire. British military expenditure exceeded the Zulu Kingdom's entire GDP by a factor of 10,000. It wasn't a question of if Chelmsford would crush the Zulu, but how quickly he'd add another conquest to Queen Victoria's crown. The catalyst came on January 11th, 1879, when Chelmsford crossed the Buffalo River with 17,000 troops, 5,000 British regulars and 12,000 colonial and African auxiliaries. He split his force into 3 columns for a converging assault on the Zulu capital. Here's what the chronicles don't tell you. Chelmsford violated every principle of concentration of force because he genuinely believed the Zulu incapable of threatening a modern military column. As his center column advanced into Zululand, the stage was set for the British Empire's most humiliating defeat. 20,000 Zulu warriors converged on Isandlwana from their mustering points across the kingdom. If they marched in column, the army would have stretched for 12 miles, a river of men flowing across the African landscape. But they didn't march in column. They moved in the Horns of the Buffalo formation that had destroyed every army that faced it for half a century. At the center, the uMbonambi regiment, the chest, comprised 7,000 veterans aged 40 to 50, men who'd fought in earlier wars and knew how to absorb punishment while pinning an enemy. On the flanks, 2 horns of 6,000 younger warriors each, aged 20 to 30, selected for speed and aggression. Their job, sprint around enemy flanks while the chest held attention. Behind everything, the loins, 5,000 reserves who would be committed wherever the line needed weight. This wasn't a mob. This was a sophisticated combined arms force, executing a tactical doctrine. Their weapons were deceptively simple. Each warrior carried an ikla, a short stabbing spear with an 18-inch blade designed for close-quarters killing. The shaft was deliberately short, forcing warriors into intimate combat range where rifles became awkward clubs. They carried no throwing spears. This was policy, not poverty. The Zulu military system forbade ranged combat because it allowed cowardice. The Ikluwa demanded courage. You closed to arm's length or you died trying. A cowhide shield, 3 feet tall, provided mobile cover. Contrary to British propaganda, many warriors also carried firearms, outdated muskets, and a few modern rifles captured or purchased, but these were psychological weapons, not tactical ones. The Zulu understood their firearms couldn't win a shooting match. Their purpose was to make noise, create smoke, force British soldiers to keep their heads down during the crucial closing sprint. At the army's core stood the uMbonambi regiment, 1,200 warriors aged 30 to 35, considered the perfect combination of experience and athleticism. They'd been held in reserve during earlier campaigns, aching for their chance to wash their spears in combat. Their regimental history stretched back 30 years, but they'd never had their defining battle. That was about to change. The logistics of moving 20,000 men without supply trains stunned European observers. Each warrior carried 5 days' rations in a skin bag, dried meat, grain meal, and rock-hard dried corn. No tents, no wagons, no artillery to slow the march. They could cover 30 miles in a day, twice the pace of a British column, and still arrive ready to fight. When Chelmsford scouts reported Zulu movements, they consistently underestimated enemy positions by 6 to 8 hours, because British officers couldn't believe infantry could move that fast. Facing this force, Chelmsford had positioned 1,700 men at a camp beneath Isandlwana Mountain. 5 companies of the 24th Regiment of Foot, the Warwickshires, formed the British Corps. These were professionals, men who'd enlisted for 21 years, who could fire 15 aimed shots per minute with their Martini Henry rifles, who'd maintained order under fire from Afghanistan to the Gold Coast. Their weapons were marvels of Victorian engineering, single-shot breech loaders firing a 450 caliber bullet with enough energy to kill a man at 1,000 yards. Effective killing range was 400 yards. A British soldier could reasonably hit a man-sized target at 300 yards. These numbers mattered because Zulu warriors needed to cross that fatal zone where rifles were supremely efficient. But Chelmsford's force had fatal weaknesses. Only 950 of the 1,700 men were British regulars. The rest were colonial volunteers and African auxiliaries whose training and morale varied wildly. More critically, ammunition supplies were bottlenecked through a single quartermaster who'd been ordered to carefully account for every bullet. The British Army, in its infinite bureaucratic wisdom, shipped ammunition in sealed wooden crates, secured with copper bands and screws. Opening one crate required tools and time. Each soldier carried 70 rounds in his pouches. Resupply required running to the supply wagons, finding the quartermaster, waiting while he opened crates, then running back to the firing line. This system worked fine in conventional warfare. Against an enemy closing at sprinting speed, it was catastrophic. The battlefield itself seemed designed for disaster. Isandlwana Mountain rose like a stone sphinx behind the British camp, a massive geological formation that blocked rear visibility. The camp sat on open ground with good fields of fire to the north and east, but Chelmsford had made a fatal decision. He didn't laager the wagons into a defensive perimeter. Why would he? That's what you did when facing dangerous enemies. These were just Zulus. His soldiers could shoot them down at leisure. The nearest cover for attacking forces was a line of rocky outcrops and dongas, dry ravines, about 1,000 yards from camp. Perfect ambush terrain, completely unscouted. Psychological warfare had already begun. For 3 days, small Zulu scouting parties appeared on distant ridges, watching, counting, vanishing. Cattle were driven away from outlying posts. On January 21st, Zulu raiders burned a colonial homestead visible from camp, the smoke column rising like a dark promise. Chelmsford's response defied logic. He took 2,500 men, more than half his force, and marched out of camp, chasing reports of Zulu concentrations 12 miles away. What Chelmsford did next would be studied in military academies for the next century as a textbook example of how overconfidence kills. He left the camp under command of Lieutenant Colonel Henry Pulaine, with explicit orders to defend the camp, but no orders to fortify it. Then Chelmsford marched toward a Zulu decoy force, leaving 1,700 men to face what he believed was empty country. But the main Zulu army, all 20,000 warriors, had hidden themselves in a ravine system 5 miles from camp, completely undetected. They'd been there since the previous evening, sitting silent in the dongas, forbidden to light fires or make noise, waiting for the moment their commanders chose to attack. But the uMbonambi regiment had made a critical miscalculation. They thought they'd face the full British force. Instead, Chelmsford had done their job for them, splitting his army and removing the most dangerous half. The trap the British had walked into was even more perfect than the Zulu had dared hope. 0600 hours, January 22nd, 1879. Lieutenant Colonel Pulaine stands outside his tent, watching Chelmsford's column disappear into the morning haze. He commands 1,000 700 men defending a camp that stretches for half a mile. No fortifications, no laager. Wagons scattered where they'd been parked. He's a competent administrator, not a combat commander. His last action was a desk job in Cape Town. 0700 hours. African scouts return reporting Zulu movements on the Nkutu Plateau about 4 miles northeast. Pulane dispatches patrols but doesn't alter the camp's dispositions. Why would he? Chelmsford took the main force because that's where the enemy is. These must be stragglers. 1,000 hours. The patrols return with disturbing news. Large Zulu forces sitting in ravines. Thousands of warriors in perfect silence. Pulane sends a message to Chelmsford. Heavy firing to the left of our camp. Cannot move camp at present. He still doesn't fortify the position. The British Army doesn't hide behind wagons from indigenous warriors. It would damage morale, suggest fear. 1,100 hours. This is when time starts compressing into nightmare. A colonial volunteer named Trooper Barker chases a small Zulu cattle raiding party over a ridge and suddenly finds himself staring down into a ravine containing 20,000 warriors. They're sitting in complete silence, regimental blocks spread across 3 miles of dead ground. The moment they realize they've been spotted, a Zulu commander stands. Then another. Then the entire army rises as one organism. Barker wheels his horse and rides for his life. 1,130 hours. The Zulu army begins its advance. Picture this. 20,000 men moving in near-perfect formation across broken terrain, spreading into the horns of the buffalo as they come. The chest advances straight toward camp. The horns begin their sprint around both flanks. They're 5 miles away. At their pace, they'll reach the British line in 40 minutes. 1,145 hours. Pulane finally grasps the situation's magnitude. He extends his line to the north and east, trying to cover the camp's entire perimeter. This is his fatal error. He spreads 1,700 men, only 950 of them British regulars, across a line nearly 3 miles long. Basic mathematics, 3 miles equals 15,840 feet. Divide by 1,700 men, and each soldier is defending a 9-foot section. There's no depth, no reserves, no fallback positions. It's a single red line drawn across African soil. The heat is monstrous. January in South Africa means high summer. Temperatures reach 95 degrees Fahrenheit by noon. British soldiers wear red woolen tunics, thick trousers, and leather equipment weighing 40 pounds. They're already dehydrated from morning duties. Now they form line and watch the horizon turn black with humanity. 1,200 hours. First contact. The Zulu advance reaches 800 yards. British companies open fire, volley fire by rank, the measured mechanical violence that built an empire. The Martini Henry rifles create a continuous, rolling thunder. Zulu warriors start falling, bodies tumbling in the grass. For the first 15 minutes, it works exactly as Chelmsford predicted. Warriors fall by dozens, then hundreds. The British line holds, reloads, fires again. Officers shout corrections. Sergeants maintain rhythm. This is what they're trained for. But here's what makes this genuinely insane. The Zulu don't stop. They don't retreat. They don't even slow down. Warriors fall, and the men behind them simply step over the bodies and keep coming. The chest absorbs horrific casualties. Later estimates suggest 500 men dead in the initial advance, but maintains formation. Officers on the British line begin to feel something they've never experienced before: doubt. 1,215 hours. Ammunition concerns surface. Soldiers are firing 15 rounds per minute. Each man carried 70 rounds. That's less than 5 minutes of sustained fire. Runners sprint to the supply wagons. The quartermaster Bloomfield, insists on proper procedures. He must account for every round issued. He has keys to only his own battalion's ammunition boxes. When soldiers from other companies arrive desperate for bullets, he refuses to open boxes not assigned to his unit. Men are literally begging for ammunition, while Zulu warriors close to 400 yards, 1,230 hours, the horns begin their work. While all attention focuses on the chest advancing from the northeast, 6,000 warriors have sprinted in a wide arc around both flanks. They've covered 3 miles in 25 minutes through broken terrain. Now they're behind the British line, cutting off retreat routes, creating a killing box. Pauline realizes with horror that he's surrounded. His 3-mile-long line is now being attacked from 4 directions simultaneously. The psychological toll becomes unbearable. British soldiers are conditioned to fight enemies who break under fire. These enemies run toward the guns. A company commander later wrote, "The compulsion to run was almost irresistible. Not from cowardice, but because every instinct screamed that what we were seeing was impossible." 1,245 hours. The right flank collapses first. Colonial volunteers, facing the full weight of the right horn, 6,000 warriors hitting 300 men, simply cease to exist as a fighting force. Some die, most run. The Zulu pour through the gap like water through a burst dam. Now they're inside the camp perimeter, among the tents and wagons. What happened next defied everything Victorian military science believed about warfare. The uMbonambi regiment, held in reserve until this moment, received their orders: break the British centre. At 12:47 p.m. precisely, as later reconstructed from watch positions on British corpses, the uMbonambi regiment receives its signal. 300 warriors who've spent 30 minutes watching other regiments bleed and die now get their chance to wash their spears. They fix their eyes on a 200-yard section of British line where the 24th Regiment's G Company holds ground. 70 British soldiers, firing mechanically, are about to face 300 warriors who've trained their entire adult lives for the next 60 seconds. The uMbonambi breaks into a full sprint. The ground literally shakes under 600 feet, pounding African soil in unison. The warriors scream the regimental war cry, a sound that rises above rifle fire, above orders, above everything. They hold shields high, covering their bodies from chin to knee. The cowhide shields are thick enough to deflect a glancing bullet, won't stop a direct hit, but in the chaos of battle, most shots aren't direct. G Company's rifles snap to shoulders. The first volley tears into charging warriors. 10 men fall. 20, 30. The mathematics are brutal. 70 soldiers firing 15 rounds per minute equals 1,050 bullets per minute, against 300 targets running at 15 miles per hour. They have 47 seconds before contact. But here's the physics that military historians still study. A man running at full sprint presents a moving target across a front of 200 yards, means each British soldier must track and engage multiple targets in rapid succession. The human eye and brain simply can't process fast enough. Aim, fire, reload takes 4 seconds. In those 4 seconds, a Zulu warrior covers 88 feet. The killing zone shrinks with every heartbeat. Second volley. More warriors fall. The uMbonambi's front ranks are being torn apart. Bodies tumble and slide in the grass, but the regiment maintains formation. The men behind close ranks, filling gaps instantly. No hesitation, no pause. Third volley. The distance is 100 yards now. G Company soldiers are loading and firing as fast as physically possible. The Martini-Henry mechanism is heating up. Spent cartridges jam in hot chambers. Soldiers use knives to pry them out, losing precious seconds. Then something breaks in the British line. It's not cowardice. It's mathematics. A soldier looks up from reloading and sees 200 warriors now 50 yards away, and he realizes, consciously understands that he won't have time for another shot. The warriors will be on him with spears before he can fire again. 23 seconds from the sprint's beginning, the uMbonambi crashes into G Company's line. Impact. This isn't battle anymore. It's physics. The front rank of warriors hits with the momentum of men who've sprinted 200 yards. The Isandlwana spears, those short, brutal stabbing weapons, punch through red tunics into flesh. The cowhide shields bash British soldiers backward, breaking formation, creating chaos. A mounted officer tries to rally his men. A warrior grabs his horse's bridle. The Isandlwana drives upward under the officer's ribs. He falls. Soldiers try to use rifles as clubs, but a rifle is 49 inches long, clumsy in close quarters. The Isandlwana is 30 inches, perfectly balanced for confined combat. In the crush of bodies, shorter weapons dominate. G Company's line shatters. Not breaks, shatters. 70 men become 70 individuals, each fighting personal battles for survival. The impossible is happening. 300 warriors have punched completely through a British line that military doctrine said was unbreakable. While all attention focuses on this catastrophic breakthrough, the other Zulu regiments launch simultaneous assaults along the entire 3-mile front. The British line, already stretched impossibly thin, now faces coordinated pressure at 20 points simultaneously. The cascade effect begins at 12:52 p.m. G Company's collapse exposes the flanks of the companies on either side. F Company, suddenly taking fire from the front and spear attacks from the side, begins to fall back. Their retreat exposes E Company. E Company holds for 3 minutes of savage close-quarters fighting, then breaks. In this phase alone, 200 British soldiers die in less than 5 minutes. The casualty rate, 40 men per minute, represents one of the highest kill rates in 19th century warfare. What every military manual said was impossible is unfolding before 20,000 eyes. The British centre, the strongest point of the line, held by veteran regulars with modern rifles, has been shattered by men with shields and spears. The killing extends for miles. Zulu warriors pursue fleeing British soldiers across broken terrain, where rifles are useless and speed is everything. The ravines become death traps. Men fall in layers, the dead cushioning the dying, creating mounds of bodies in narrow defiles. In 17 minutes, the organized British force ceases to exist. By 1:15 p.m., it's no longer a battle. It's a hunt. Individual moments of heroism flash through the chaos. Lieutenant Melville and Lieutenant Coghill grab the Queen's colour, the regiment's sacred banner, and ride for the Buffalo River, 4 miles away. They're chased by 50 warriors. At the river, swollen from recent rains, their horses are shot from under them. They try to swim, still clutching the flag. Warriors wade in after them. Both officers are killed in the shallows, the colour drifting downstream. They'll later receive Victoria Crosses posthumously. The same company the uMbonambi broke finds himself surrounded by 7 Zulu warriors. He fixes his bayonet and fights for 3 minutes, killing 2 warriors before an Isandlwana thrust ends him. A British surgeon watching from a ridge 400 yards away later testified to Fielding's stand. Pauline himself, the administrative officer thrust into command, dies trying to rally a final defensive square near his tent. He's found later with 23 Zulu bodies around his position. Whatever his limitations as a tactical commander, he died fighting. From the Zulu perspective, this is validation of everything they've trained for. The chest regiment commander watches British soldiers, men he'd been told were invincible, breaking and running. The elite 24th Regiment of Foot, which has never known defeat, is being annihilated before his eyes. One Zulu Induna, commander, later told a British interrogator, "We thought you would keep killing us until none remained. When your line broke, we could not believe it. Then we knew we would kill you all." The casualty ratio isn't as lopsided as other colonial battles, but the outcome is absolute. The British force is annihilated, not defeated, not forced to retreat, completely destroyed. Only 55 British soldiers escape from the camp. Most of those are cavalry who can outrun pursuit. The uMbonambi regiment's specific achievement: they broke the British centre in less than 1 minute of close combat, creating the breach that collapsed the entire position. Military historians estimate 300 warriors killed or wounded, approximately 180 British soldiers directly, with their breakthrough enabling the deaths of hundreds more. The silence that follows is more terrifying than the battle. 20,000 Zulu warriors stand among 1,700 bodies. The captured British camp contains enough ammunition to supply the Zulu army for years, enough rifles to equip 2,000 warriors, and supplies worth £200,000.